When we were last together, we were doing the Whiskey Rebellion and why Washington would use 13,000 troops to put down a rebellion of about 100 people, and what did we come up with as a reasoning for his seeming overcompensation. Yeah. Not to demonstrate his power. He's not out there, building up his muscles and saying, look at me.
He's trying to prevent any prior rebellion or rebellions in the future.
By demonstrating not only put down a rebellion, but enforce the law. That's the major message here. The government has to demonstrate it has the authority to enforce the law through a demonstration of brute force and to send a message. Any other groups thinking of doing this, this is what you can expect. Okay? So that's why Washington is doing what he is doing. He saw what happened with Shays' rebellion. He sees what's happening with the Whiskey Rebellion, and he says, damn it, we're not going to allow it to happen in Western Pennsylvania what happened in Western Massachusetts. We're going to nip this in the bud. Nip it in the bud. In the bud. Done. Nipped. Okay? So, the other thing that people look at when they evaluate Washington's presidency is foreign policy and how Washington handles foreign policy. And what is Washington's approach to foreign policy and relations? Tim? To remain neutral, to stay out of foreign affairs. Whenever you think Washington and you think foreign policy, think neutrality. How do we stay out of other people's business? How do we stay out of Britain's affairs? How do we stay out of France's affairs? How is it that we can go about doing our own thing without getting sucked into everybody else's international messes? That's Washington's approach. Let me ask you, why is that a good idea? What is the benefit of staying out of foreign affairs? Yeah.
You can kind of steer clear or not get involved in anyone's alliances.
He gives that admonition at the end of his presidency when he's leaving office in his farewell address. He says, steer clear of foreign alliances, stay out of that kind of stuff. But what is the upside to doing that? Why to stay out of war? Pratt. Well, Washington would argue that trade is, paramount in, what is America all about? America is about trade and making money, okay? You can't do that if you're engaged in a war, or it becomes very difficult. So, okay, fine. What else is an upside to staying out of a war? Think of the wars we've been in for the past 12, 13 years. They are expensive. They are a drain on resources. They are a drain. Think of all the money that's gone into Iraq and Afghanistan, and if that money had been invested elsewhere. The president just put forward his budget plan for it just came out. They just released the numbers for the budget plan for 2014. And they looked at discretionary spending, meaning the money that's available in the budget to spend on things we want to have, not necessarily the things we have to have. Huh? Social programs, things like that. Okay. 57% of discretionary spending is going to defense. 57% is going to defense. 6% is going to education. Where are the priorities? You ever get a chance to look at, I saw that pie chart yesterday. I don't know if I wouldn't be able to find it real quick. But I looked at that pie chart and I'm like, oh my God, science and research, 2% discretionary spending. 57% discretionary spending on defense. Yeah.
I have a friend who went to England and she was talking about this then, and they were literally like, what? What? Why?
Yeah.
They just didn't get it.
Yeah. Healthcare coverage, I think, was like 4%. Yeah. So Washington is giving this advice, I mean, and look, he first has to deal with it when it comes to the French Revolution and his response to the French Revolution. Okay? He declares neutrality when France tries to invoke the Franco-American alliance from the American Revolution. Now, people are divided. There are some that believe we should help the French out. There are others who believe that we should steer clear. People like Thomas Jefferson, idealists like Thomas Jefferson, believe that we should provide aid and assistance to the French. Why? Why is he such a Francophile? Yeah. Well, they did provide aid, and so is this not meeting our international obligation if we have a treaty of alliance? What exactly does that mean? But what else is Jefferson inspired by when it comes to the French Revolution? This is the benefit of having a previous world history experience. Yeah.
They're trying to overthrow their king.
They're trying to overthrow their autocratic king and establish a democracy based on freedom and liberty. The French have been inspired by the American model. Jefferson says it's only natural that we should help out other people around the world who are fighting against autocratic government, which is really idealistic. I mean, think about it. Think about if the United States today went around and helped out every country fighting against an autocratic government. Well, I mean, that's an element to the Cold War, helping out. But, I mean, we backed as many dictators as we backed democracies. It wasn't so much about promoting democracy as it was about containing communism. But, I mean, imagine today if we were going around the world putting boots on the ground in every country that was in the midst of some sort of civil strife against a government that they thought was oppressive. It would be nonstop. So while it may be great to sit on the sidelines and talk about the idealism of democracy, the practicality of actually assisting in that endeavor would mean we would be involved in nonstop engagement around the world. I mean, that's the same in the 1790s as it is in 2011, 2012, 2013. I mean, look at all the countries in the Middle East in 2011 that started to rise up against their autocratic governments. Were we going to get involved in Tunisia and Algeria and Egypt and Syria and this country and that country? Are we going to put boots on the ground everywhere to help them out because they're fighting for freedom? And I mean, what kind of freedom are they fighting for? I mean, if you talk about, I mean, look at Syria, for instance. Great example. Look at Syria. You've got Syrian rebels fighting against an autocratic dictator named Bashar al-Assad, who has used poison gas on his own people. Bad dude. But look at the people within that anti-government group. Some Al-Qaeda, some terrorist elements, some radicals, I mean, some real, yeah, it's like you've got essentially in that rebel group a bag of cats. So I mean, you're going to back that. Likewise, Washington looks at what's happening in France and sees people being beheaded, the reign of terror, Robespierre, all of that stuff. He sees that happening and he goes, "Dear God, we're going to back that." I mean, what are we more interested in international? Are we more interested in democracy? Are we more interested in stability to promote trade? Washington would argue stability. Hamilton says, don't touch the French Revolution with a 10-meter cattle prod. Stay out of it. Not only because backing the French rebels would be akin to backing terrorists today, but if we back the French, that's going to hurt trade with Britain. And I don't know if you know about Britain in the 1790s, but they're sitting on a big pile of money. And that's where the trade is. You want to make money, you trade with Britain. So Hamilton argues we should sidle up to Britain. Jefferson argues we should sidle up to France. And you've got division within the administration. Now, to make matters worse, the French send their own guy over to try to get around the Washington administration's neutrality proclamation. Edmund Guiney actually goes around the countryside trying to recruit Americans to become mercenaries for the French. Oh, I know that your president has said that America is remaining neutral, but you can ignore him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And Washington has to actually step in and order this guy expelled because Guiney is trying to get Americans to conduct foreign policy on their own. And this establishes another important precedent. Individuals cannot conduct foreign policy. They cannot speak on behalf of the United States. Only the federal government can speak on behalf of the United States and establish foreign policy. That's the same today. So Guiney is ordered expelled, but by the time he gets his bags packed, the government in France has changed again, and so he's kind of the Edward Snowden of his day. He's a man without a country. He's stuck at the port with no place to go. Yeah.
Wait, why was Edward Snowden? Didn't he have a country? Didn't they just have one?
Yeah, if he comes back here, he's going to get arrested.
Oh, is that what was
So that's why he's sitting in Russia right now. Because to Guiney,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a good possibility Guiney would go back and get executed. So Guiney was like, yeah, I think I'll just hang here. This looks pretty good. Met a nice American woman, got married, lived out the rest of his days on Long Island. It was all good. Live in Long Island. Right now, he's living in Russia. They've got him set up in an apartment, and he sits there and he leaks out information every now and then. I love the fact that Edward Snowden went to my son's elementary school. Fantastic.
He worked at the company my mom.
Really? Yeah, he graduated from Crofton Woods Elementary School. Went to Crofton Middle School. Went to Arundel High School.
He like gave information that was already like confidential.
Yeah, I know. But the fact that he was releasing it in detail was a problem. Anyway, moving on. Your test is coming whether we're done or not. So you can drag this out all you like. All right. So, much to Jefferson's chagrin, Washington issues a neutrality proclamation stating that the United States will remain friendly and impartial. They tell the French, we would love to help you out, but we cannot do it at this time. We do not have the economic resources. We do not have the military resources to help you out. But that doesn't stop the Americans from getting caught in the middle of what's going on. You're seeing several instances of British violations of American sovereignty. Tell me about that. What did you see? How are the British violating American sovereignty? This refers to the top 10. Let's go.
They kidnapped sailors and take them and recruit them into the army.
Oh, in the Navy, actually. Yeah, so American ships are being stopped. American sailors are being kidnapped, forcibly added to British Navy ships. It's a policy called impressment. Okay? Impressment. I know you're thinking impressment, the British are like, hello, Governor, what do you think of my ship? Isn't it nice? Aren't you impressed? No, that's not impressment. They've been pressed into the service of the British Navy. Yes, John, what? Okay, let's name more. How else is American sovereignty being challenged at this time?
They encourage the
Yes, that is the other problem. That the British are basically sitting there on our soil. Now, they've been told in the Treaty of Paris, 1783, to evacuate forts on America's frontier. They're still there. They haven't left. And to make matters worse, not only is that a cinder in our eye, but they're also providing weapons and supplies to the Native Americans to launch rebellions against Americans trying to settle in the Ohio River Valley. This is where the Shawnee Confederacy under Little Turtle gets its money and supplies and guns from. They get it from the British. It's why Little Turtle is conducting this rebellion in the first place. It's why Mad Anthony Wayne has to go out to the frontier to put down this rebellion. And there are American politicians saying, wait a minute. Yeah, we have to fight the Indians, but it's really because of the backing of the British. Shouldn't we do something about that? And there are people who want to go to war with Great Britain. For lack of a better term, they're disrespecting us by doing this. So Washington has got a conundrum. The French don't like us because we're not honoring the Franco-American alliance and we're not providing them aid. The British, it's not that they don't like us, they just don't respect us. You know, what's America going to do? We've got the world's largest navy. We got the world's largest army. We got the world's largest economy. What you got? So Britain's pretty much doing, whatever, they'll do what they want. With impunity. Without, they're doing it because they know that they can best the United States. So Washington has got a conundrum here. You've got some people that want to go to war with the British. You've got some people that want to go to war with France. You've got a nation divided. And Washington has got to ride that middle ground, which is extraordinarily difficult for him. But he has the reputation to be able to do that. He has the stature. Okay? So he can rise above these factions in America. Now, he's going to send representatives to negotiate with the British. And what you're going to come out with is something called Jay's Treaty. Now, this is an extraordinarily controversial treaty. Why? Yes, Eric.
Because the Americans, a lot of Americans thought that the British got the good parts of that deal.
What were the good parts of that deal? See, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the specifics. Yeah. Go ahead.
One of the things was the British were never paid back the Americans for stealing all
Okay, so impressment continues without limits. What else? Anybody come across anything? I mean, look, if you generally got the idea that the British came out on the sweet end of the deal in Jay's Treaty, you're right. But the thing is, how did they come out on the sweet end of this deal? What is it that they got that angered so many Americans? If you take a look at the specifics of the treaty, you can see why Americans are so angry. The British say that they're going to evacuate the forts in the Northwest in 2 years. Why would that anger Americans?
They were supposed to do it.
They were supposed to do it 10 years ago, and they still haven't done it. British and U.S. citizens can freely travel across the U.S.-Canadian border. Why is that a problem? Yeah.
Makes it more likely for an Indian attack.
Absolutely. It opens the whole frontier to Indian attacks from Canada. And it allows spies, British spies, to get onto American soil with no barriers. It allows Indian attacks in Canada allows Indians in Canada to migrate freely to America, which is going to exacerbate, make worse, the Indian problem on the frontier. The U.S. would not allow enemies of Britain to use our ports.
So we can't trade with France.
So we can't trade with France? Wait, Britain's telling us who we can and can't trade with? Sounds familiar. The U.S. grants Britain most favored trade status, meaning we will trade with Britain first above all other countries. What does this sound like? This is the Navigation Acts, Redux. And we're an independent country, and Britain's telling us who we can and can't trade with, where we can and can't trade. So Americans are saying to themselves, wait a minute, I thought we just fought a war of independence against these guys, and now Britain's telling us what we can do, where we can go, who we can trade with. How is that independent? Americans generally hated Jay's Treaty. The U.S. has to pay off debts owed to Britain, and I love this one. Britain cannot guarantee to stop impressment. Yeah, we'll do our best, but we make no guarantees. Yeah.
Couldn't the fact that in the treaty the British aren't allowing the Americans to trade with other countries? Couldn't that be because they knew that the Americans would not follow they would try to not follow that specific term in the treaty, and they could slowly say, if you're not going to do it, we don't have to leave our forts. And
You are crafty. You are crafty there. Are the British setting the Americans up, giving them a codicil in this, giving them a line in this treaty that they know the Americans will ignore, and therefore the British can come along and say, you voided the treaty by ignoring the stipulation, the codicil, the line. Therefore, we can remain on your soil. If you're going to violate the treaty, so can we. Wow, you are duplicitous. We need you in the government. Set them up. I don't know if it went that far. I don't know if there were that many chess moves involved in the stipulation here. But it's an interesting thought. It shows me that you're thinking. That's great. It shows me you're thinking. That's cool. Most Americans think that America is selling out to Britain. The reaction is loud and negative. This is George Washington being hung in effigy and burned. Why is that a problem for a guy like George Washington? Well, he is president of the United States, but why is that a problem for a guy like George Washington? Yeah. He's used to being adored by the public. He's used to the public adulation, or as you put it, in favor. Adulation. He's used to being a symbol. He's used to people respecting him on both sides. And now, because he backs and signs Jay's Treaty, he looks no more than a political hack for Alexander Hamilton. He's just a politician. He's a human being, not a god. Yeah.
I was going to say that he was an honored war hero, and now they don't care about that at all.
Exactly. It's like, what have you done for me lately? And so Washington, for the first time in his life, starts to reap the after effects of a decision that people don't like. To me, as a historian, this is what convinces Washington not to seek a third term. The reaction. His reputation has been tarnished. If he seeks a third term, will that then further tarnish his reputation? This was a man who was concerned about his rep. For him, it was about image. And right now, his image is soiled. So, I mean, this is 1795, 1796. Washington announces, I'm not seeking a third term. I'm retiring. I put two and two together. There you go. You get the Jay's Treaty, you get Jay's Treaty fallout, and the announcement that he's not seeking a second term. Iggity aggity ook. Washington didn't like this. He didn't like the reaction. Now, almost as a side note, you get something called Pinckney's Treaty. What was that? And it actually has to do with Jay's Treaty, but it doesn't seem like it does. John. Okay, this is a treaty between the United States and the Spanish, with the Spanish believing that the United States and Britain were somehow going to gang up on Spain. But why would they believe that? That paranoia didn't just come out of thin air. Not really, but shows me you're thinking. Go ahead.
The Americans wanted the territory that the Spanish had?
Not necessarily, although we did have our eyes on it. Good.
Americans and Britons don't exactly believe each other.
Well, the fact that America is currently engaged in statecraft diplomacy with Great Britain, negotiating Jay's Treaty, Spain is thinking to themselves, oh my God, what are they going to negotiate? What are they going to do? So why don't we, what's the word I'm looking for? Preempt that and do something nice for the Americans to, keep them up. Hey, America, I know we haven't exactly gotten along in the past, Stono Rebellion and encouraging your slaves to rebel in the 1730s and all that stuff, but we'll make nice with you here. We own Louisiana. This is something that the Spanish got at the end of the French and Indian War. When France lost all their holdings in North America, Spain got Louisiana. And so Spain says, look, I know we've kept Americans from using the Mississippi River in the past. We're going to open that up for you. How about that? How's that for a sweetener? Now, you're saying to yourself, what is the big deal about Americans being allowed to use the Mississippi River? Yes.
You can farm more inland, not just the coast.
If I'm a farmer here, where do my crops go out to the world? East Coast. York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Charleston. Out to the world. If I'm a farmer just settling in Ohio or Kentucky or Tennessee or Indiana, how do my products get out to the world? Am I going to load bushels of corn on wagons and take them over non-existent roads crossing the Appalachian Mountains? No. I have to rely on water. And since there is a mountain range here, all the water west of the Appalachians flows this way. So if you want to load your crops and your supplies to send out to a world market, you need the Ohio, the Cumberland, the Tennessee River, the Chattahoochee. And they all drain into the Mississippi watershed. The Mississippi is the carotid artery of the North American continent. And so by opening up the Mississippi River, it makes farming in the West viable and profitable. Yeah.
They also lowered Florida's border.
Yes, they did. They did. This whole disputed area is settled there. So feel free to settle Alabama and Mississippi. All right. That's been a test question, just so you know. That's why I also. All right. So Washington has served 2 terms. He has established the precedents for the president. He has exerted the authority of the national government. He has created financial stability with Hamilton's financial plan. He has maintained neutrality by staying out of the French Revolution and signing Jay's Treaty. Oh, by the way, I forgot. If Jay's Treaty was so odious to Americans, why sign it? I forgot to ask that. If it's so odious if it's so bad for Americans, why sign it?
To avoid going to war with Britain.
It avoids a war. And that's the one upside of Jay's Treaty. It avoids a war. And that's Washington's main goal. Stay out of war. We are not ready for it. We don't have the military. We don't have the financial capacity. Heck, we're divided as a country on sundry issues. So Washington leaves office. But before he leaves office, he establishes one last precedent. The farewell address. Every president since Washington has given some sort of farewell address. Kind of a, hey, this is what we've done over the past 4 or 8 years, and, here's my advice to you. So what does Washington provide as advice for Americans as he's leaving office in 1797? Yeah.
The divided political parties will be the fall.
He says you guys need to watch out for 2 things. 1, political factions or parties. We call them parties. Back then he called them factions. But he says, let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful, bad, effects of the spirit of party generally. Why does Washington warn against the spirit of political parties? Why does he warn that political parties are bad? Well, yes, it obviously splits the country. Can we take that further? Yeah.
Ongoing conflict between federalists and republicans.
And he's looking right now at the political battles that have ensued within his own cabinet between Jefferson and Hamilton over how to proceed with the bank, how to proceed with the Whiskey Rebellion, how to proceed with the French Revolution and Jay's Treaty. There's just been division and division and argument and argument. But the fear is that if you ascribe yourself to a political party, you're going to be more loyal to your political party than you will to the needs of the country. Haven't we seen that happening recently? Haven't we seen people making decisions because it benefits them politically rather than the country as a whole? This latest round of crap that has happened in the Congress, the government shutdown and all of that stuff. Those guys up there, both sides, would, have good advice if they would take heed of Washington's admonition here. You put the country before your party, not the party before your country, because then you destroy yourself. The other thing that Washington warns the American people about is foreign alliances. Steer clear of permanent alliances. Look at that signature. Woo! Isn't that a fancy schmancy signature right there? That's a guy that wants to be seen. You can just tell, just a handwriting expert looks at that and goes, ooh, that is a guy who is full of himself. and it's overly fancy. But it is our policy to steer clear of permanent alliances. And guys, this is going to be a cornerstone of American foreign policy from Washington to Woodrow Wilson. We are going to stay out of alliances. And Wilson gets us involved in alliances during World War I, joining the British and the Russians. And then afterwards, we go back to this Washington, steer clear of permanent alliances. There are politicians at the end of World War I who say we should stay out of the League of Nations because that's a permanent alliance of some kind and we should, mind our own business. But at the end of World War II, when it becomes clear that America is the indispensable nation, against the spread of Nazism, communism, and all of the isms that are out there, that's when America starts joining alliances like NATO and CETO and ANZUS and all the United Nations and all these other things. But up until the middle of the 20th century, America does a pretty good job of staying out of foreign entanglements. People heed Washington's advice. Now, Washington's successor has got to do what Washington has done. And Washington's successor is the Vice President, John Adams. He is elected by 3 electoral votes. Unlike Washington, who was elected unanimously, this is a very close election. And that is going to be a problem for John Adams. You have a very divided country. And you've got a guy whose personality is not exactly magnanimous. Washington could rise above faction in America because he had the reputation and the stature. John Adams liked to get down and dirty. John Adams liked to argue. And John Adams said, look, man, I'm the head of the Federalist Party. I'm a Federalist president. I'm going to put forward Federalist policies. Even though most people recognized Hamilton as the spiritual head of the Federalist Party, John Adams was the president. He beats Thomas Jefferson by 3 electoral votes, which means, according to the Constitution at that time, Thomas Jefferson is the vice president. So you've got a president of one party and a vice president from another, and for the next 4 years, Thomas Jefferson is going to use his money and influence to finance newspapers and organizations to undermine his own president. I mean, can you imagine what kind of insanity that would be? Can you imagine Barack Obama having Mitt Romney as his vice president? Or having John McCain as his vice president? Or, oh, for God's sake. God almighty. You betcha. So this is when people start to question the need for a constitutional amendment to fix this system. And it's why you wind up with, eventually, the 12th Amendment in 1804. The 12th Amendment, the presidential candidate picks his vice presidential candidate, and you elect the ticket. The number 1 picks the number 2. And you vote for the ticket. The 1 picks the 2. That's the 12th Amendment. Huh? Is it John Adams' birthday today? Really? Wow. That's cool. Man died 93 years old. Yeah. All right. So Adams comes in under less than ideal circumstances. He's got a country divided. He's got about a half of the country that doesn't like Federalists and doesn't like Jay's Treaty, so he's dealing with that issue. He's got Jefferson there as vice president, taking pot shots and trying to undermine him, and he's the vice president. And the thing that John Adams has to worry about throughout his presidency is something called the quasi-war. Now, what does quasi mean? quasi. Not quite. Somewhat. This is somewhat of a war, okay? Shots are being fired. People are being killed. Things are being broken. That's a war. Killing people and breaking things, that's a war. But the United States never officially declared war on France, mainly because John Adams is trying to adhere to what Washington said and maintain neutrality. If we can avoid a war, let's do that. Now, Adams is no fool. Adams is going to be prepared in case there is a war. Adams launches the construction of brand new ocean-going, heavy gun vessels like the USS Constitution, which was built under Adams's presidency. If anybody's been to Boston and seen the USS Constitution. He's going to order up a permanent standing army, and he's going to ask George Washington to lead that army. Yeah, Washington just retired, just went back to Mount Vernon, just starting to get back into the crops and out in the fields and, hang out with Martha a little bit. And they're asking him to come back. Yeah, he is about to die. That's right. He is about to die. And there's an interesting little story that goes with it. As a matter of fact, Adams even creates a brand new branch of the military. Kind of his brainchild. He says, what if we took Army guys and put them on Navy ships? The Marines. John Adams is the father of the Marine Corps. And so the Marines are founded under the Adams presidency. But despite the fact that Adams is gearing for war, he's continuing to negotiate for peace. And that angers Alexander Hamilton to no end. Hamilton wants a war with France. Why? Think about it. Yeah. He thinks it will force us to sidle up to Great Britain. And Britain is where the trade is. That's where the money is. Hamilton wants our ties to be closer to Great Britain. He believes that if we declare war on France, that will happen. Now, here's the little interesting story that's never on a test but helps you understand what's going on here. Yes, George Washington's about a year away from death. And so Adams wants Washington to be the head of this army to lend it credibility. But Washington doesn't really want to talk with Adams about this. He just wants to farm. And so Adams goes to the guy who Washington trusts the most. And from the previous administration, who seemed to be the guy that Washington listened to all the time? Hamilton. And he says, hey, Alex, do you think you could get George Washington to head up this army for me? Hamilton says, sure, no problem. I'm on the case for you. However, I have a stipulation of my own. If I get Washington to be the head of this army, I get to be the number 2 in the army. Because everybody knew that Washington was old and probably wasn't going to be able to fulfill his duties, and Hamilton would then be in charge of the army. And we all know what Hamilton was up to in 1783 up in Newburgh. Hamilton is a dangerous man. And Adams, when he hears that, he's like, I'll get back to you. Hold off on that. So, Adams is going to send representatives to France to negotiate an end to this conflict. He's going to send over, one of the Pinckneys, I forget which one, Charles or Thomas, I forget which one it was, John Marshall, and I believe Elbridge Gerry, late of gerrymandering. And they are met by the ambassadors to the foreign minister, a guy by the name of Talleyrand. And they are given the code names X, Y, and Z. Why? Because they demand a bribe. If America wants to meet with our foreign minister and negotiate, America's got to pony up money first. You got to pay for access. John Marshall, who leads this delegation, says, thanks, we're out of here. And actually his phrase is, millions for defense, but not 1 cent in tribute. Translated, we're out of here. John Marshall takes his delegation and goes back home. Tells Hamilton, tells Adams, tells anybody who will listen that the French tried to extract a bribe from the United States. Hamilton says, aha! That's the excuse we need to go to war. And Adams says, whoa, 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 let's cool down here. Let's cool down. Everybody cool. Let's all remain a couple of Fonzies here. We're going to be cool. And so the XYZ affair is blown out of proportion by the ultra-federalists like Hamilton. Adams is trying to maintain peace. What? Yes, before they would negotiate, you had to pay. And John Marshall said, I'm not paying to negotiate. And so went home, told everybody in America. America said, oh my God, we're insulted. See, back then, if you were insulted, that was an excuse enough to go to war. So, America is on the precipice. They're on the knife's edge. You've got Hamilton wanting to foment a war with France. You've got Jefferson arguing that John Adams is nothing more than a dictator for creating a permanent military presence. You got poor John Adams in the middle of all of this. And yet, for 4 years, John Adams sticks with it, and sticks with it, and sticks with it. He could be swayed by Hamilton. He could have been swayed by Jefferson. He could have been swayed by the public. And yet, he continued to do what he believed was right, not what was politically expedient. It would have been very politically expedient. It would have been very easy for John Adams to say, let's go to war. Done. Easy. It's easy to declare war. It's difficult to find peace. But John Adams does it. Because eventually, by 1800, there's a new sheriff in town in France, and his name is Napoleon. Napoleon. I wish you wouldn't look at me like that, Napoleon. No Uncle Rico fans in here? You know, while you were out there, you know, your friend Pedro, Uncle Rico, made $120. Anyway, John Adams is able to negotiate with Napoleon, and he's able to get a treaty. Why? Because Napoleon's got bigger fish to fry. Napoleon's got other things on his plate. Napoleon's got grand visions of European conquest, and the last thing he needs is America being a mosquito, being a fly in the ointment, a monkey in the wrench, pain in the butt. So Napoleon and Adams negotiate an end to the Franco-American alliance, a treaty of peace, or at least we're going to leave each other alone, and the quasi-war comes to an end. It's called the Convention of 1800. And it's kind of the crowning achievement of John Adams' presidency. John Adams avoided war, just like George Washington avoided war. But John Adams pays a political cost that George Washington did not. Because in seeking this peace, Democratic Republicans didn't like him, but he also alienated Hamilton and the Federalists as well. And so by the end of his presidency, nobody liked John Adams. Even after, well, here was the problem. The Convention of 1800 was signed about a week after the presidential election in 1800. So any benefits that Adams would have reaped, it was too late. The election already happened and he lost. And here, I mean, you don't have to write all this down, but I just want you to see that Adams is getting it from both sides. You've got Jefferson calling Adams essentially a monarch, a despot, a dictator. You've got Hamilton out there writing that he's crazy, or at the very least, vain and jealous. But Adams is getting criticism from the Democratic Republicans and all the newspapers. By the way, you think Fox News is out there as a basically the news arm of the Republican Party? That idea is as old as the Republic. You had Thomas Jefferson using his personal fortune to finance newspapers throughout the country to print diatribes against the Federalists. You had Federalist newspapers printing stuff against the Democratic Republicans. The idea of political organizations backing news organizations to put forward their agenda, that's an old chestnut.
They never used to listen.
Yeah. So, Adams makes a decision. Is Adams trying to create a monarchy? No, it's a lie. At the very least, it's an exaggeration. Is Adams crazy? No, it's a lie. So, in Adams's mind, how do you stop lies from being printed about you?
You print the truth.
Well, you can print the truth all you like, or you can censor the press. And that is what Adams is going to do. This is the dark spot on Adams's presidency. It's called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, a lot of it has to do with foreigners. Okay? And who can come into the country, and who can be arrested, and who can be expelled, and you're giving the president a great deal of authority in who gets in, who gets arrested, who gets expelled. Okay? You're giving the president a great deal of authority to enforce national security. And that is the argument that Adams gives. This is a national security thing. Kind of like the USA Patriot Act in 2001 after the terrorist attacks. You know, for your security. Just like Woodrow Wilson did during World War I, arresting protesters who criticized the government. Just like Franklin Roosevelt did in World War II, arresting Japanese Americans and imprisoning them. National security. We're taking precautions. Here, we're taking precautions. So if you are an immigrant, it takes you 14 years to become a citizen. If you are believed to be dangerous, you can be arrested or expelled without due process. And that's why the Jeffersonians are criticizing Adams as being monarchical. And sedition. fancy word that means criticism of the government. And basically, the Sedition Act says you can't criticize the government. Who does this particularly target? Adams signs this law knowing that it's going to target Jeffersonian Republicans who are criticizing it. This is an attempt to shut down the political opposition. Can you imagine if Obama came out with a law that shuttered Fox News? Freaking red state America would go bananas. But that's what Adams did. He's trying to shut down the political opposition. And the political opposition is not going to take this lying down. They're going to react. And the reaction to the Alien and Sedition Acts is, it's unconstitutional, we don't have to listen to it. It's called the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions, and they are written by Jefferson and Madison. And basically, in a nutshell, the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions say that the states entered into a compact with the government, therefore, the states have the right to declare a law null and void. The states are the arbiters of what's constitutional or not. And so therefore, if a law is unconstitutional, a state can ignore it. It's the beginning of something called the states' rights ideology. And it's been used to protest the Alien and Sedition Acts. In the 1950s, it was used to protest civil rights legislation. Southern states said, we're ignoring it. We're nullifying it. We don't have to follow that. Now, hurry. Yes, it does. It doesn't mean that you can't make this argument. I mean, you have people making this argument today. You got, with Obamacare, you got states saying, we're not doing it. States' rights, we're not doing it. Well, the federal government, the federal government has the authority to come in and enforce it. Does it really want to do that? During the 1950s and 60s, it took President Kennedy and President Johnson to send federal troops into southern states to enforce civil rights and voting rights laws. That's enforcing it. You can protest all you like. You can say states' rights all you like, but the federal government will have the authority to do it. It's just a matter of, will the federal government use its authority or not? Jefferson and Madison are saying here, the federal government does not hold sway. The states ultimately decide what's constitutional and what isn't constitutional. Wait a minute, who decides what's constitutional and not constitutional? The Supreme Court. But that is only established in Marbury v. Madison, 1804. This is like 1798, 1799. So it's before the Supreme Court establishes its authority to determine constitutionality. Up until this point, nobody knew who determined constitutionality, so Jefferson and Madison say the states determine it. Now, going into the election of 1800, John Adams does not have the backing of the Federalists. People are angry at the Alien and Sedition Act, believe John Adams is taking too much authority, subsuming the Bill of Rights. And so in the election of 1800, you've got a problem. Two guys tied, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. John Adams came in third, so he is not going to win. So what winds up happening is this election gets thrown to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives has to make a determination of whether the president's going to be Thomas Jefferson or Aaron Burr. Now, every time comes out a tie because each state delegation gets a vote. So each state gets a vote, one vote. And each time they vote, tie, 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 tie. Like 37, 38 votes. Tie, tie, tie. Finally, John Adams steps in and tells Alexander Hamilton, hey, look, man, you got to get the Federalists in the Congress to pick one of these guys. We know that it's not going to be a Federalist president. This is a Democratic Republican. This is a Democratic Republican. But you guys have got to pick one. The Federalists have got to pick one. And so Hamilton throws his support to Jefferson. Because while Hamilton doesn't like Jefferson's politics, Hamilton doesn't like Burr personally. Believes Burr to be a dangerous man, more dangerous than Alexander Hamilton, which I would argue is true. Later. And so, Thomas Jefferson becomes the President of the United States on the vote of the House of Representatives with the backing of Hamilton, and his Vice President is Aaron Burr of New York. Now, Jefferson calls this election a revolution, and a revolution presupposes that there is going to be wide-scale change. So the Federalists, believing that all of the things that they've done over the past 12 years are going to be thrown out, they decide we need to do something to make sure that Jeffersonian...
Good morning, Southern. Today is Wednesday, October 30th, a B-Day. Please stand for your Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Attention all NHS members. There is a mandatory National Honor Society meeting Wednesday, November 6th in the auditorium during Bulldog Block. Please bring news.
So the Federalists have lost the presidency, and they've lost the majority in the House and the Senate. So they've lost two of the three branches of government. The only place where the Federalists have influence is the judicial branch. All the judges there are Federalists. So to make sure that Jefferson and his crew don't dismantle everything, the Federalists, before they leave town, are going to pass a law called the Judiciary Act of 1801. And what it does is it establishes a whole bunch of new judgeships throughout the country that are going to be filled with Federalists before John Adams leaves office. So it's like a mad race to get these judgeships filled out and sent out in the mail. They're called the Midnight Judges because literally John Adams is up the night before he leaves office filling out these judgeships, trying to get them out so that there are enough Federalist judges throughout the country to block any radical changes the Jeffersonian Republicans may do. Does that make sense? The most noteworthy of the Midnight Judges is the new Chief Justice, John Marshall. John Marshall, notice how long he is Chief Justice. 35 years. Long after the Federalist Party is dead and gone, John Marshall will be there as the ghost of Federalists past.
Bulldog Block in room F208, Mid-Sitters. Yesterday, the boys soccer team advanced to the next round of the playoffs with a 5-0 victory over Lockwood. Southern was led by the team assist leader who had 4 assists and the team leading scorer, Noah Blacker, who had 5
Jefferson comes into office March 4th, 1801. He's the first president sworn in Washington, D.C. Brand new capital.
Calling all bowling dogs.
And what Jefferson does is he strikes a tone that presidents since then have tried to strike.
For November 5th. Bowlers, Seamus, West, and D105 before November 5th.
My friends, despite our political differences,
if you are interested in
we are
participating
all
in the Underwater
Federalists,
Club,
and we are all
contact Mrs. Bukowski in room
Republicans.
D107. You will
He's
build
trying to
underwater
strike a
speed
middle
bridge
ground.
and compete
As
in April
president,
and
he
enable
has to
development.
be
An
president
informational
of
meeting will be held in
everybody.
late November.
And so he strikes that balance. And what you're going to find is, when we look at Jefferson's presidency next week, Thomas Jefferson actually winds up being a better Federalist than most Federalists.
That's all for your announcements today. Have a great day, Southern.
All right, my friends, I will collect your top 10 for Washington. Give you one more homework grade in the grade book. We're done.
Because I printed it on the school printers and they suck.
Guys, these things have to be stapled and stuff before you come into class. Okay? Just wait. Just wait. Just wait. I want them passed forward alphabetically. Makes it easier for me to grade, easier to pass back. Huh? Huh? No. Just by row. It just makes it easier for me to pass back.
You're still recording, Allison.
You guys got to get this stuff done ahead of time, because now we're wasting time here.